Hello and welcome to the 7th episode of the Meet the Entrepreneur podcast. This is Artin Zahiri, and I am the co-host of this feature along with Ramir Kashwani. Today we'll be talking to Babson alum and good friend of the show, Ryan Laverty. Ryan is the co-founder and chief operating officer of Arist. Arist is a text message learning platform that helps Fortune 500 companies and leading nonprofits rapidly train their employees entirely via text message and WhatsApp.
So in order to kick it off, why don't you just tell us a little bit about what Arist is and then how you ended up founding Arist in the first place and why.
Yeah, sure thing. So Arist is it's a text message learning platform, and so essentially, it started probably about like 2.5 years ago now. So my co-founder and I had both been students at Babson. He'd been running a nonprofit at the time, and I'd been doing work with content design for a services business I was running when I was like teaching people public speaking basically, and he at the time was doing a lot of nonprofit work. And he came to me with this idea of like, hey, what would it kind of look like to kind of create a sort of low internet bandwidth solution to trying to teach people. And we became really fascinated just by the learning design of it. And so I went to bed that night thinking about it, got up the next morning, and I was like, what would it, at the time I was doing like public speaking coaching, and I was like, what would it look like to create like a public speaking course via text message? And so like a day later, I stayed up and made that, and that was our first like text message course. And we said, all right, this is like a content light, internet light model of learning is fascinating. The assumption we've got to solve for that is, can we actually teach someone something of substance via text message? And so we like created some really basic courses, found some software that allowed us to just like manually text people, and sent out like it was quite literally someone on the other end of a laptop typing these things out, to like 100 people, got some results. And it was fascinating. It was like 78 or 79% of people had said that they liked this method of getting this information better than like books or lectures or videos. And so that was compelling enough for us to kind of continue into it. And so, over the next kind of year and a half through the whole like finding product market fit, fun and craziness, we ran different experiments trying the application of this with academics, with nonprofits, with all these different groups. And what we found actually was, while we thought the internet lightness of it was going to be the biggest selling point, and it still isn't to some degree, the biggest selling point was really just the short form content model. 97% of people will check a text message in 3 minutes of getting it. And simultaneously, the biggest problem with learning content is that people don't read it or pay attention to it. And so if you can condense it down and you can send it over text, then you can have a really meaningful interaction. And so where we ended up getting most of our traffic from was from corporate learning, and it was from training these massive workforces at scale, all just via their cell phones. And so today I'd say about 85 to 90% of our business just comes from mostly like Fortune 100 to Fortune 500 companies, and the other 10% comes from nonprofits or kind of one-off use cases.
Yeah,
That's
makes sense.
that's really great. Archie, you can go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to quick question. I mean, Ryan, it's a great idea. It makes so much sense. And how exactly did you like? Did Michael, the founder, reach out to you? How did you actually like become a part of it? So at such an early stage.
Yeah. So Michael and I were living together, and at the time, he kind of came to me and was like, "Hey, I have this idea. I know you're really into the world of like content design. You like really building teams. I'm really good at like, kind of just throwing this stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks." And I think from the early stages, we had like a 2 to 3 month period where we just practiced like working together to see if it would work as co-founders. And we were just like, hey, if we're going to be equal partners in this, we want to make sure we have like complementary skill sets. And I think, the lesson in there is, for any co-founder relationship, you want to really make sure that you do actually like both you work well together and share a lot of the same values, but also you have really complementary skill sets. Like he will go through our finances and stuff like that, and that just puts me to sleep and I can't focus on it at all. While I'll do like our customer success and scale up, and talking to the same customers all day like wouldn't interest him as much. So everyone's kind of got their things that they're really good at, and they can just kind of handle. And even now, he'll do a lot of like our initial sales, pass someone off to me, and then, okay, we've got 100 people at Amazon using, how do we get 100,000 people at Amazon using, right? And so we're sort of tasked with these different challenges. But I think that was the fun part in the early days, is we didn't really formalize a relationship for 2 or 3 months, because we just made sure, hey, do we really like working together? And then it was like, okay, we like working together. Let's file the C Corp, get the cap table, give ourselves each half the company. Like let's do all of that, So that was sort of how that came to be.
Awesome.
That's really great. I wanted to follow up on two things, and one of them was, you kind of focus on like low internet or light internet rather as kind of what you thought the selling point would be. Can you just go into that and then also talk about, some of the projects that Arist has done outside of the U.S. and outside of like the corporate world? Because I think that that's like a really fascinating point.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and it still is a pretty big selling point. It's more so though the access to like high broadband internet. And so, while 25 to 30% of the world has access to the broadband internet needed to load a full video, about 75 to 80% has the access to kind of the level of either internet capability or just SMS capability to just receive a text or WhatsApp message.
And that's a stark difference, right? Like,
right,
that's pretty
right.
big.
And so I think the biggest misconception people have is when they think low internet bandwidth, they just think like the poorest communities in the world, when the reality is that for most of the world, there's still not you could have enough internet to do email, but not enough internet capacity to load a video. And that middle zone is billions of people. And so whether you're, a massive nonprofit or a massive corporation, let's say Petrobras in Brazil, right? Like these massive companies that have hundreds of thousands of employees, they don't have that strong internet. Some of the coolest use cases that we've done, when COVID started, we had done, we did courses on COVID-19 health and safety with a partnership between the Sudanese government and the British government training journalists. And so we trained about, 1,200 journalists in Sudan. We ran a course with the Naki Valley refugee camp in Uganda. And so they were doing, they were doing a lot of COVID-19 health and safety training. They didn't know no one had ever taught them like how to accurately do the hand washing protocols where you wash your hands like a surgeon, things like that, And so that was really cool work, and it's still a lot of work that we do. And like I said, even though like 90% of our revenue comes from like Fortune 100 to 500 businesses, I would say probably like 30-40% of our use cases sometimes is still a lot of those use cases. More recently, like this week alone, we're building coursework for ecom trading, which is a large global agricultural supply chain. And so they're training farmers in Ecuador on how to be financially literate. And then we're also doing training for farmers in India between a partnership with PepsiCo and USAID. And so they're teaching these women in India who are potato farmers how to get better yields, how to look at the like accurate sizes of what you're producing. So we still see these really fascinating use cases, but it still ends up being like training employees, but it's fascinating because it's training them on things like financial literacy or agriculture.
Right. And that's, I think that's like really important, and I'm really happy that, you guys are doing like that good work, all over the world, because I feel like people and certain companies fail to kind of expand outside of their geographical zone, and I think that that's so important. I mean, since everybody's kind of remote anyways, it only makes sense.
Yeah, and on that point, Ryan, Arist is perfect for remote learning, and obviously as a result of work from home, COVID-19, it's just been huge for the sector. Like, how big has that been for the adoption of Arist? Have you guys really noticed a large tailwind from such a generational shift?
Yeah, for sure. So initially it was really bad for us. And then I think we were very fortunate, especially at a time when it was really tough for a lot of people. So, the way that basically worked is January, February of 2020, we've got these big potential corporate contracts. We're like, okay, some of these are finally going to come to fruition, these enterprise contracts that took us so long. And then, second week of March hits. And while, ed tech and most like remote learning for schools takes off, for corporations, a lot of employee training is a discretionary expense, and the last thing companies had was extra money to spend. And so within a 2-week span, absolute radio silence. People I'm working with get fired and start asking me to help them find jobs. Like, it was really, really tough. And so we basically sat down in March and we were like, this is over. Like, it's not, we're gonna have to find some sort of new angle or something. And we pretty much had radio silence from our industry for like 2 months, and that was really tough. And what we did during that time was we just said, we're not sure how we're really going to make money, but we have this tool and we have this access that people can use. And so we worked with a number of school districts and actually just gave, for about 4 or 5 months, ended up giving free access to teachers all around the US. And so we saw a lot of really cool use cases for things like homework delivery and flipped classroom modeling, where you'd like teach concepts ahead of time and then go into a Zoom session. So these really, really fascinating use cases. And I think that, you know, the lesson there for us was to always just kind of like keep doing that, like never to give up there and to keep doing that, you know, exploration. And so that was an interesting time. And then around like, you know, May or June, we saw things start to pick back up. We got into the Y Combinator accelerator, and so they helped us to kind of like really pushing us to focus on just one specific segment. And we still, you know, give a lot of teachers free access to the platform. It's more so they don't have the budget to pay for tools like that. And so for us, it's better to just give it for free and then have some great like advocates and use cases out of it. And I think, you know, the most interesting thing for us is that before COVID, the reason I say it's long-term beneficial for us is that before COVID, about 30% of our use cases were standalone text message courses and 70% were reinforcement. And so it was part of a larger learning journey, video module, et cetera, et cetera. But after COVID, you know, people's preference for remote training came up. They realized how powerful it was. And it also, I mean, it accelerated the learning industry 10 to 15 years. And so now we see that's flipped. And I'd say about 80% of our use cases are completely standalone text courses, which is better for us. Companies do all their training via Arist, and about 20% is supplementary, or they'll use it for reinforcement. So I think for the company, it was just really beneficial for like the long-term adoption of actually accepting that this was a beneficial medium. You know, we'll never know if we were just too early at some point, but I think we were definitely fortunate in that.
I think you're right in that there was like a big acceleration, right, in terms of like how people kind of perceived and accepted like a lot of like remote learning tools. And it's you know, it's obviously amazing that ours kind of fit into that category. Do you think, like, just off the top of your head, like, you know, from working in the space, like what other types of learnings or companies have you seen that you think are going to really take off kind of in inventing or reinvigorating like ways of remote learning?
Yeah. So we actually just ran a webinar on this last week, so it's pretty fresh of mind. But
Oh, nice.
the biggest things, I mean, so Arist is what we call a nano learning tool. And so there's always been this big push for micro learning, which is engagements that are 15 minutes or shorter. Nano learning is things that are like 2 to maximum 10 minutes in length. And so really small sound bites. If you think about where Gen Z learns most, it's TikTok, it's Twitter. And so engagements that are just really, really short form are taking you know, a leap. I would say modular content too. And so for developing remote learning materials, anything that's copyable, that's editable, that's widely shareable, those are popping up a ton, both in academia and in corporate learning. You know, if I can spin up an entire new training, it shouldn't take me weeks and weeks to build everything from scratch like people were doing before. I should be able to copy an old one and, you know, edit it as easily as a graphic designer would use a Canva file. And so that's something that is, you know, being seen a lot in the content creation side. I think the biggest thing is really just kind of the meeting people in the flow of where they are. And so, you know, remote learning, remote work means that people are on Zoom all day. They have video fatigue. They don't want to sit and watch another video. So people have had to get really creative with different mediums. And so they're asking themselves, okay, not just how do I send it to someone, but what's the optimal time? What's the optimal length? And because people aren't in the classroom, it's forced people to really think about, you know, how do we actually create sustainable hybrid solutions? And so what types of things should you teach a student or an employee at home versus in the classroom or in the office, so that when they get in the classroom or office, they can use all that time for discussion, for relationship building. Anything that's lecture or term definition or anything concept oriented should completely be taught remote. And I think will be even after COVID's long gone.
And Ryan, the way the Arist platform works is, I mean, you guys are basically the technology provider and the customer can use it to design the courses, or are you guys involved in course creation as well?
Yeah, so we will typically involve ourselves in course creation sort of in the onboarding process, and we'll actually train their learning designers on how to effectively create these mediums. We had to, like, we wrote the white paper on this, we wrote all the guides on this, but, you know, we are not a, like, content creator per se. We'll actually, we've started doing a lot of cool things with the GPT-3 AI and a number of other tools to do what we call content reformatting. And so we're not creating content, but we're going into companies and saying, look, you've got hundreds of courses, give us a few weeks, we can convert these all into text message format. And then most of your content resources are sitting in this format in the Arist platform. And so most of what we're used for is still I would say like the design and the delivery, and they'll do their own content design. But we do a lot of hand holding with that because we want to make sure people, use the medium right. And I think a year or two from now, we'll barely touch that process just because it will be much more widely adopted.
So I have a follow-up question on that is, right now SMS is obviously and like WhatsApp are like the two main highways. Do you guys think about expanding into like other messaging platforms, like maybe like Telegram, or you could even do like other social media platforms like Twitter and Instagram?
Yeah, so we're actually doing a platform rebuild right now that'll finish up end of January, and we're looking at integrations with Slack, Microsoft Teams, and even email. The thing to keep in mind there is that there's been stuff done over those mediums before, and they have lower completion rates because things get lost in a feed, especially if it's an email, for example. But it's also worth noting that there's sort of a internally we've called it last mile learning. There's you can text 98, 99% of employees, but there's that 1% who still has like a flip phone from 2004 and doesn't carry it with them, right? And so for that group, we want to make sure we have options so that everyone can get their learning. And so for us, we'll open those options, but at least at the start, they'll be sort of secondary and tertiary. Like it'll ask, do you want to sign up for this course via SMS and WhatsApp? And there will be like an I can't button. And if you hit the I can't button, then it'll show you some other options. And
Right.
we're usually very like get things out there, test, see how they go. But with something like that, we're very cautious because Slack and email are one of those things that it sounds easier for a training leader at first glance, but they don't realize that it could potentially lead to worse outcomes down the road.
Got it. That makes sense. And I wanted you to just spend a few minutes or just a few moments just telling us a little bit about the Y Combinator program. Obviously, like it was, like remote this year, which I think might be like the first cohort that has done that. So that was obviously like a new experience for Y Combinator as well as obviously for the new class. So, yeah, why don't you just tell us about how that experience was and like how much that kind of helped Arist in like its growth and development as a seed stage company.
Yeah, I think YC helps a lot. Obviously, it's a great program, and if anyone's considering it, I would say definitely do it. I can't speak to the in-person experience versus remote because I've only had the remote, but
Right.
from what a lot of our partners said, it was a really good experience because they got more FaceTime with us. We got to speak with a lot of our batchmates a lot and really got to be pretty close with them because everyone was, especially in the beginning, like kind of overcompensating by like meeting a lot of folks, and I think that helped a lot.
But connecting remotely was it kind of stimulated that. Like,
right,
oh, I want to make
right.
sure I want to do that,
Right, and my batchmates were also from like all over the world, and so many more international founders had access to YC this year because it was remote, and I think that was one of the really good sort of unintended benefits there. As far as the program itself, like it was amazingly helpful. We would not be where we were today without it, and I think it's there. I think there's sort of a there's an idea that you go through an accelerator and it's helpful because they'll like hand you like connections or clients, and accelerators can be helpful with that, but I think what YC does well, and a lot of this stuff is public, is they really push you to like have the right mindset around founding. So what experiments are you running? Are you talking to users? Are you building things people actually want? Where's your focus? Like, is all of your focus in this one thing? Are you doing these intense like 2-week kind of sprints where you're trying to optimize for one metric, trying to hit one goal? And then, okay, throughout that entire process and that entire cadence, are you being mentored well by these people who can kind of guide you in the right direction? And I think one thing that they like to say that is a good way to think about it is, if you talk to a successful founder, their sample size might be like 1 or 2. If you talk to a successful VC, their sample size might be like 20. A YC partner, their sample size is like 500. And so it's really they've in this industry of tech, in this stage of early stage startups looking to raise money, right? They've really gotten this down, and I think that was a lesson for me in entrepreneurship in general. Is a lot of like entrepreneurship lore and education is very, very general. When a lot of it's so industry specific in terms of what you measure, what you focus on, the types of people that are successful, the character traits of people that are successful, that it's best to really kind of like look inwards and say, okay, for my specific industry, for my specific company, what are the things that focusing on has made people successful?
Right.
So yeah, I would say it was definitely very helpful.
And I understand that like obviously like after the last demo day, you guys were able to like close like a $1.9 million seed round, which like congrats, like that's like a really big milestone.
Yeah. Congratulations.
For for early stage companies. But before you talk about that, I want to know if you could just spend a little bit talking about your first investor, who I believe it was Fred Kiang. He's I think that that's a really fun story, and yeah, if you could just share it, that would be great.
Yeah, sure thing. So, I guess context is that for the first year and a half of the company, like we were broke. We spent like $1,000 in the first like year of the company, because it's kind of a fun challenge in the beginning. Like, when you have no money, how can you get customers or figure all this stuff out with pretty much no money? And I think outside of tech, that's obviously harder. But
Yeah.
the first time we ever got money was we'd like won it through a pitch competition, and that got us through the summer. But our first ever investor, yeah, was so the backstory is we did, as you two know, the e-pitch competition at Babson. And I had pitched in front of like Jamie Siminoff and Fred Kiang and all these people. But Fred Kiang, he is the founder of Sunrise Duty, which is the custom, the duty-free shops in China. And he's a really great guy. And he's a Babson alumni, and he is an AK Psi alumni, which is a professional fraternity that, of course, that we were all in at Babson. And Fred's really great. I had met him the night before the competition. And he was like, oh, like, did the handshake with me. He's like, oh, you're a brother, and he's like, but, I know you're pitching tomorrow, so don't tell me anything. Don't tell me, like, I want to go in completely
No
like neutral,
spoilers.
unbiased, completely neutral, unbiased, whatever. And then when I did the pitch, and I think I definitely own like a debt of gratitude to Fred, because he was one of the first people to speak up and just say like, hey, I believe in this, I'll invest like 50 grand at these terms. And it's huge to, this was about a year ago now, and it's huge to get that first check, because especially for me, like I was a senior in college, and it's very, very hard to get any money for your business when you're still a student. And so, that was huge for me. And he ended up like, signing within like a week or two. And then we just felt like a different stage of company. And then after you got that first check in the door, for our pre-seed round, we did about like 200 grand. And he was the first check in that, and I think that that's huge, because you can say to people like, look, here are the terms you invested on, here's all that stuff, and that's and then it has precedent, and then it's very easy to get kind of the follow-on investments. And even with this most recent fundraising round, it always starts with one person who is ahead of the pack, who believes in you extra, puts that first check in, and then it's much easier for everyone else to follow suit. And so like a few really good advocates or mentors or investors, those are the people who like really make the difference, in making that all happen.
Yeah, I definitely think that you need to have that champion. And I think that that's like a really important point that you touched on for anyone who is, thinking about starting a company that is worth investing in, is that you need to have those champions, who can lead you around, and who can, put themselves out there for you. That's really good. And so then, we've interviewed other Babson, alum on this podcast, and we had an interview with Ben Smith, who was the founder of Goal House.
Full house.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask you about your experiences with co-living with entrepreneurs, obviously from E-Tower Babson, but then also after the fact, I felt like, your group kind of like continued doing that as such after the fact. I think that was like really interesting, and I thought that was. I feel like that had some sort of impact, on like working on Arist. I know that a lot of you guys kind of like are working on your own things. So maybe if you could touch on that, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. So I mean, obviously I owe Babson a huge debt of gratitude, like would not be anywhere near, I would probably just be working like some 9-to-5 job had I not gone to Babson, right? I think, unpacking a lot of that, because there's a lot I could talk about
Yeah.
here, but I think that the biggest thing that Babson gave me was kind of this ability to be very self-confident and say, look, it doesn't matter that you're young. You can affect change through experiences like being an AK Psi, through experiences like running E-Tower, which I got to do for a year. You really have this opportunity to say, look, people will believe in you because you have great ideas and because you have lots of energy, and not necessarily because you have lots of experience or money, but because you can just figure all these things out. And the other thing Babson taught me was really that to be successful, like there's a million ways that founders and investors are successful, and everyone's kind of the most successful when they just really lean into who they are and what they're good at. For me, I was not like that persona of like a really tough, like shark, like kind of Donald Trump type business person. Like that was not me at all, right? I was the very like, high empathy. Like, let's not make people afraid to talk to us. Like, let's really understand our customers and what they want, and how much they'll pay. And, I think leaning into that, E-Tower taught me a lot about how to lean into that, because you're working with all these different types of entrepreneurs. You see them all being successful in completely different ways. And you learn that, look, like, at the end of the day, they're not swimming upstream here. They're all just, leaning into what makes them really, really successful, and they're helping with that. I think the other interesting learning for me too was, Babson was really good at teaching me how to, like, kind of be, empathetic, be a good leader. And I think in the very early days of startup, it's mostly just like being a doer. It's just like throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And then now we've got like a team of 6. We'll have a team of 7 next week. And a lot of my day to day is really just like managing people. And so it's, now I get to use a lot more of those skills, and it's really great. But I think that people get discouraged in those early days because they're not immediately applying a lot of those skills. And so anyway, all this a roundabout way to say, like, Babson is a really good, like, I would call it like a really good personal growth accelerator in terms of teaching you, like, here's who you are, here's what you're good at, here's the most amazing, like, friends and colleagues and mentors you'll ever meet. Okay, now you've got all this in your tool belt, go kind of like change the world or figure out what it is you're going to do,
Right.
No,
Oh, that's great.
Ryan, on that point, we talked about how great Babson is for the business skills and kind of just for these soft skills, but not too much emphasis on the technical aspect. What was your experience like running Arist without a technical background? One of the key questions when creating a startup is, do I need a technical co-founder? How did you guys approach that aspect of it?
Yeah. And so again, all my answers to this you're getting with my, like, little 2 cents of my opinion before the answer is, I think a lot of business students will undervalue their own, like, agency in how much they can figure out before they bring on that person. And so, my technical co-founder had been a friend of mine I knew who was a software engineer. But Michael and I waited to bring him on for a number of months because we were like, well, we don't know what we want to build yet. We don't know if this is a viable business yet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we did was, like I told you, we found some website where we could just manually text people. We essentially had, gone into it. And by the time we went to our technical co-founder, it was like, okay, here's a good idea of what we want it to look like. Here's these tests we've run. Like, basically, hey, we know people want this. We know this is a valuable thing. And here's kind of what we'll need to build, right? And as a business student, the reason startups fail in the early days isn't because they can't build it. It's because nobody wants it. They'll go build it and then there's no demand. And so rather than going product market, you've got to go market product. You've got to figure out, okay, what is that actual, thing that people want? And as a business student, I can create mock-ups. I can find some really, like, low tech or no code way to make this work enough to see if someone wants it. And then once I've gotten that proven out, I can go find someone. And I think people will go to a technical co-founder with an idea. And for someone like that, they're not going to risk their time on it, right? Versus if you go to them and say, hey, look, I've got these mock-ups. I've shown people want this. I've got a wait list of 1,000 people who are waiting to use this once it's built. And, I've got all of these things that show this is a really cool thing to work on. And you've seen I've done this work so far. Will you help me build this? And I think that's a much more compelling case because at the end of the day, everyone wants to work on something that looks like it's taking off, and no one wants to work on something that looks like it's just starting out. And I think even when things are just starting out, as a business student, you can prove all of those things without any technical expertise.
I also think you brought up a
great.
good point on having a vision, right? I feel at the early stages as well, it's the first step is like having a vision and then understanding if people want that, and that vision crafting is, I think those are, like, having a clear vision is a key success trait of any good founders or CEOs,
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. Ryan, maybe I just have one. This is kind of just like a random question, but you talk about a lot of your big customers are these large enterprises, Fortune 100, 500 companies. What is it like? How does it feel to be dealing with these companies, and also how do you have them being comfortable from a cybersecurity perspective? How do you give them that enterprise level security that they're going to need, considering these are highly sensitive large corporations?
Yeah, absolutely. So we spent a long time in the early days on, like, making sure kind of all security boxes were checked before we actually entered into deployments. But I think, again, like, enterprise companies, it's like anything else in that, you're working with a small subset of people within this massive organization. And while you need to check all those security boxes to, do a rollout, you don't need to check them to have 10 people at the company just try using it with maybe their personal credentials and say if they would use it or not. And so, for us in the early days, we had a very non-secure version that was just tested by like advisors in the space and those sorts of folks, VCs who'd funded companies in that space. It would kind of tell us like, look, this is either something these people want or don't. Here's about how much they would pay for it. And then you can dive into doing all the security stuff. Now our CTO, he used to work at the Department of Defense. He's worked for a number of other startups. He can do enterprise security checks all day long. But back in the day, we didn't have that. And so I think the other thing to say here is that, the early days of getting those clients was very, it taught us a lot. What we basically did was we got a bunch of advisors who were in the space. Again, like if you have a cool idea and some basic traction, you can kind of parlay that into everything else. And so, they became advisors of ours. They were able to introduce us to enterprise clients. That's how we got a lot of those conversations going. And then we just you kind of just have to learn everything. I didn't know about enterprise sales, right? We had to, how do we structure a pilot package? How do we structure contracts? And read books on it, watched videos, articles, got lots of feedback on our process, and really just kind of kept going on it, and I think that was a really valuable experience, because every stage of being a founder is just, you learn a new job, you pass it off to someone else, and then you learn another new job, you design a new system or process. So all a very roundabout way of saying that it feels interesting to work with enterprise customers, but it a lot of it still just does feel like working with any other customer,
Yeah. No, but it's great to see how far you guys have come. It's an enterprise ready platform. It has all the feature rich functionalities that these large companies require. So, it's ready to go. So congratulations, Ryan. You guys have built a wonderful platform.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, and I think we're, there's every day is just kind of new challenges. It never feels any different, but I think it's also, it's been a really fun experience, and we've definitely learned a lot.
I think something I want to ask before we wrap this up is what are the big goals now? 2021, 2022. Where do you kind of see Arist, and what is what's the pie in the sky dream that you guys want to do?
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think for us right now, we've sold tons of pilot packages. We're deploying at all these companies, and on the product side, we're unveiling a bunch of new stuff. Like we're doing a whole product rebuild, like I mentioned, a bunch of new functionality, and really kind of expanding just the limits of what the product can do, all centered around how do you give this person training a massive organization complete visibility? How do you give them insights? How do you integrate and play nice with all of the deeply embedded learning systems they've had for 10 years? And so really, making Arist optimal to be the go between all, the same way that Segment is for analytics systems and for where you get your data from. Arist is for content and the endpoint of delivery, whether that's like a learning management system or something else. So being a really good integration into those Fortune 500s is something we're focused on from the product side. I think from the business side, it's all about customer success and deployment, which is a lot of my day-to-day now. It's like, okay, you've got these customers using at this big company. How do you get them to pass it around? Again, how do you get it to go from like 100 or 1,000 at a big company to all like 100,000 employees? And so a lot of our day-to-day is really spent thinking about, what are the things that will kind of get this to have some virality within the company? What are the things that really, who do you talk to? What do you price it at? How do you navigate that whole environment? How do you design a system that involves them deeply embedding their systems enough where they're bought into it, but also just creates enough value that like they love it and just want to pass it around. And I think the last really fun challenge of my day-to-day is figuring out, what is kind of the future of like text message learning and learning in general look like, right? Like what's the optimal tool for someone to have 2 to 5 years from now that will allow them to both communicate and to train all their employees? And then how do we start designing that today? And so a lot of what we do now is looking at, okay, 1, 2, 3 years out, where do you want to be? And then working backwards, as opposed to up until a few months ago, it's a lot of like, okay, what did the next 2 to 3 months look like? And so I think that's been another good lesson. Like once you have resources, you kind of, like Jeff Bezos always famously says, oh, I've got, my head's in like 2023 right now. This quarter was planned out years ago. And I think the larger companies get, the more they have the ability to do that and to backtrack. So that's kind of where we're headed, at least right now.
It's almost like mental gymnastics, kind of jumping between 3 years into the future, but also making sure that you're present-minded on achieving the goals that have to get done today in order to hit those, 2023 marks.
Yeah, I last thing I'll say, I love this stage of startups because it's like every founder, I think, is naturally good at one stage of startups, and then they become good at the other ones. It's like 0 to 1, 1 to 10, 10 to 100, 100 to
Right.
1,000. I really like kind of the 1 to 10 and 10 to 100 because it's more, you've got more resources and you can be a lot more strategic. But your role changes again to more of like a manager, a delegator, and someone who has like it's more about the things you say no to than yes to, right? It's more about the focus and where you put your resources, as opposed to the early days when you've got to be really optimistic, but it's a lot of just throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks. And so I think I've just kind of I've loved like the evolution of my job because it would have gotten boring otherwise, I think.
No, that's great. You got to have a dynamic, kind of, lifestyle and kind of mindset as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. I think that, we covered a lot. It's been really wonderful kind of having you on. And, there's a lot of, I think, kind of like golden nuggets here about like founding a company, raising around, getting that first check in, and like building a product to start. I know you guys are kind of just hitting like another big inflection point now, but yeah, best of luck on kind of hitting those goals, those lofty goals, and making sure you get that pie in the sky.
Yeah, no, thanks again for coming on, Ryan. I mean, it's so interesting. We could really talk to you all day about this. It's so nice to have you. In a few years from now, this will be like one of the first interviews of many for you. And I know you guys have been in the press a lot lately, so it's an honor to have you on. Really appreciate it.
Awesome. Yeah, thanks so much. Our team and Ramir, seriously, like anytime, always happy to talk about this stuff. And yeah, hope you guys have a great rest of the day.
All right. Take it easy, Ryan.
Thank you for tuning in to Meet the Entrepreneur number 7. Make sure to go to www.arist.co and sign up for Arist Bites. Arist Bites will keep you updated about all things Arist and all things learning. Hear awesome client stories, cool use cases, upcoming learning trends, and get early access to new features. Here at Startup Society, we want to thank Arist for keeping the American dream alive. Stay golden.